Hello, my name is Joyce Fuller, and this is a presentation fulfilling the Master of Arts in Communication requirement for Missouri State University. My master seminar paper is entitled Inspiring Volunteer Commitment and Retention Through Meaningful Staff-to-Volunteer Communication. In today's economy, effective staff-to-volunteer communication is crucial. Volunteers have many options on where they spend their time, so once an organization gets a volunteer, they want to keep it. Communication, however, must be meaningful to the volunteer, or it can backfire on the organization. A 2004 government brief suggested the way volunteers are supervised and communicated with affects retention, but that was not studied extensively. Therefore, this study will focus on what meaningful communication means to the volunteers. It analyzes the quality of the communication, not just the quantity. Volunteerism is defined as having four tenets. First, the volunteer must be actively involved. They must be relatively uncoerced, not motivated by financial gain, and focused on the common good. Approximately 62.6 million people volunteered at least once between September 2014 and September 2015, which is almost 25% of the U.S. population. This is according to the U.S. Department of Labor and their Bureau of Labor Statistics. Additionally, volunteers donated 7.9 billion hours of their time, with an estimated value of to organizations of $184 billion. This just goes to show that we are not talking about a small group of people. Volunteerism is very large, very prevalent in the United States, and they offer a lot of benefit to nonprofit organizations, not just in volunteering their time to help the nonprofit further its cause, but actually also saving the organization money in that volunteers do jobs that paid staff does not then. So that's where the $184 billion came in. Previous studies have showed that there are 6 functions that motivate people to first volunteer. First, the values, which in a nonprofit organization means that their cause aligns with the volunteer's own values system. Understanding, which is the volunteer's desire to learn more about the world or utilize underutilized skills. Enhancement means enhances the mind or body through service. Career, the volunteer wishes to learn skills to further their own career. Social, they want to find others with similar interests to befriend. And finally, protective, which reduces negative feelings in their own lives by helping others. Volunteer organizational commitment, unlike the list of motivations which we just covered, what gets them there are no such guidelines for volunteer retention, which is what keeps them coming back. Therefore, a lot of nonprofits are looking at for-profit theories to figure out what brings an employee coming back might also bring a volunteer coming back, and along those lines, the theory of organizational commitment comes in. Organizational commitment is defined as a belief in and acceptance of the volunteer's goals and values, the organization's goals and values, a willingness to exert considerable effort on behalf of the organization, a strong desire to maintain membership within this organization. This study contends that fulfilling each one of these components is vital to volunteer retention. The main aspects of volunteer initial orientation is where the first 2 components in that list of organizational commitment is going to be met. In that initial orientation, there are 3 things that should be covered: the cause, the system, and the social aspect of the organization. In the cause section, you'll go over the organization's missions, value, history, services, and future plans. In the system part, you will go over the management and procedural information, and in the social part, you'll look at the organization's culture. After going through all 3 of these, the volunteer should have enough information to initially commit to the organization, and the first 2 components of organizational commitment should be met. However, it's the 3rd aspect of organizational commitment that we're looking for here, which is maintaining membership. That would lead to volunteer retention and satisfaction. It's best achieved through regular communication. As you can see, several studies have been done, and several have proven that regular communication is the best way to continue this this desire to be a member of the organization. However, several studies have also shown that volunteers often get little to no communication or feedback from an organization. So that's what this particular study would like to fix. The first way to fix that, of course, would be to hire a volunteer manager. Grundy suggests that no other staffing method so manifestly demonstrates a sense of organizational commitment to the program and its priorities as does a paid manager of volunteer resources position. Unfortunately, some organizations look at volunteers as a free resource and don't feel the need to put any money into that group. However, by hiring a paid volunteer manager to oversee important aspects like communication, that demonstrates to the volunteers how important they are to the organization, and it also makes it someone's actual job to communicate with the volunteers in an effective way. So this is definitely a positive step toward maintaining that membership and achieving that third level of organizational commitment. The manager of volunteer resource is to volunteers what the human resource manager is to the staff. As you can see here in this graphic, the volunteer manager not only works with volunteers, but they work with staff who also works with volunteers. So they really do look at this as a triangle. In order to maintain a healthy volunteer program, you need to, of course, have the volunteers, but you also need to have the volunteer manager and you need to have the staff working with these volunteers and communicating with them effectively. In any situation where two groups of people work closely, there will, of course, be conflicts. Volunteer communication with paid staffers is an important decision, though, whether a volunteer stays or goes. So when these conflicts come up, that's a key part of maintaining membership or going elsewhere in a volunteer's mind. Kramer's 2013 study found that both staff and volunteers can feel superior to each other, which leads to conflict. The volunteers think they're superior because they donate their time, money, and expertise, and they don't have to be there, quote unquote. However, staff feel they are in charge of volunteers because they do have to be there, they are getting paid, and so they see the volunteers as their assistants in his study. Researchers also have proposed two different approaches when dealing with staff to volunteer conflicts. Ellis and McDuff both recommend analyzing the source of the conflict from the perspective of both the staff and the volunteer in an attempt to prevent or solve the problem. However, McNamee and Peterson suggest that we need to examine ways to live with the conflicts rather than solving them. This leads to this particular study's research questions and hypothesis. The first research question is, to what degree does the quality of communication between staff and volunteers affect satisfaction and retention? The second research question is, what do volunteers identify as the most important characteristics that need to be present in staff-to-volunteer communications to make a positive impact? Based on these two questions, three hypotheses have also formed. Hypothesis number 1, there will be a correlation between length of service and overall satisfaction with staff-to-volunteer communication. Hypothesis number 2, incorporating positive characteristics into staff-to-volunteer communication will have a positive impact on overall volunteer satisfaction. And hypothesis 3, there will be a positive relationship between overall satisfaction with staff-to-volunteer communication and volunteer recognition. In order to gain data to analyze the two research questions and the three hypotheses, the study proposes doing a pilot survey. This pilot survey would be distributed to a Midwest Humane Society. This is one of the largest humane societies in the United States with over 1,000 annual volunteers. However, a subset of that total number, 400 volunteers, would have access to the survey. These 400 are dog walkers or animal enrichment volunteers. These are the volunteers who work specifically with the animals on a daily basis. These 400 potential participants all must be at least 18 years old. They must complete an on-site orientation, watch 3 online videos, and be mentored by a current volunteer at least twice in order to become that dog walker or animal enrichment volunteer. Also, there are 3 area shelters. Each shelter has their own web group, and one actually has 2. So there would be a total of 4 internet-based web groups that would have access to the survey. The organization itself has 3 shelters, and they are all open admission. What that means is that no animals are turned away except for space. Euthanasia unfortunately does happen on a daily basis. However, it's only for behavior or health reasons only. Euthanasia itself is a hotly debated topic between staff and volunteers. This is reinforced by the American Humane Association, so this is a widely known fact in the industry. Another survey also found that public perception of animal shelters is that they're merely storage facilities for animals who will eventually be euthanized, and this belief contributes greatly to the problem of recruiting and retaining volunteers. Therefore, since volunteers are dealing with such a sensitive issue, open, honest communication is vital. This is the animal statistical data for 2016 in the organization that I would be providing the survey to. As you can see, there are 3 locations, location A, B, and C. However, as noted, location A only performs euthanasia in emergency situations. Otherwise, they will take their animals that need to be euthanized to location B or C for that process to be done. While I have included the data for all animals, specifically the volunteers that I would be targeting work with the dogs and puppies only. So that would be the area where the dog walkers and enrichment members that I would provide the survey to, those would be the numbers most pertinent to them. As you can see, there's the total numbers admitted to all 3 locations and then the total. The dogs adopted or who went to rescue groups. And finally, unfortunately, the animals that were euthanized. As you can see at the bottom, the total would be 19%. However, not all 19% of these dogs or puppies had access to volunteer interaction. For instance, if a dog came in severe medical distress, perhaps after being hit by a car, the dog would be immediately humanely euthanized for health reasons, and a volunteer would never have access to that animal. So just because it says 19% does not mean that all 19% of animals had the volunteers interacted with them. However, knowing that over 1,300 dogs were euthanized at the Humane Society could have again affected the volunteers emotionally or psychologically, and that would have impacted their retention or satisfaction. The subjects of the surveys, the total number on the E group is listed. However, we would be looking at only the active volunteers. In order to be considered active, they must meet the following criteria: membership on an appropriate E group, volunteered at least once during the past month, and not on an approved leave of absence. This brings the total possible participants to 190. The instrument, a pilot survey, would be created in SurveyMonkey, incorporating 2 existing surveys. Details would be included on what the survey intends to examine and how the results would be used. Emphasis specifically placed on the voluntary nature of the survey. I want to make sure that the participants understand that this in no way impacts their volunteer status at the organization. Participants will also be assured that the data would be kept anonymous and confidential. Section 1 will go over demographic questions, specifically gender, age, education level, length of volunteer service, current star color, which relates to the amount of training the volunteers have chosen to undergo. Section 2 would focus on volunteer satisfaction. Section 3 would focus on the communication quality, specifically examining what characteristics describe the current relationship between staff and volunteers, and an open-ended question would also be included. Section 4 would focus on volunteer recognition, and Section 5 would ask about retention. For example, each participant would be asked if they intend to continue at the organization and why or why not. There'd also be an open-ended question at the end asking what the organization could do from a volunteer perspective regarding communication to enhance their experience. Once that data is collected, it would be analyzed both quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, first, all the data could be exported into Microsoft Excel. Then that would be exported into SPSS in an appropriate spreadsheet for that. And from that data, we could find descriptive statistics, Pearson's correlations, and one-way ANOVAs. Qualitatively, that could also be exported to Microsoft Excel, organized into categories, and then analyzed for themes. Quotes would also be identified. In the quantitative part, the first section would be the demographic data. The second section would be the volunteer satisfaction, which specifically relates to that first hypothesis. In order to explore the relationship, we would perform two Pearson correlation coefficients. Section 3 talks about communication quality. This data would relate to the second research question, also relating to the second hypothesis, and a simple linear regression could be performed in SPSS. Section 4, volunteer recognition, relates to the third hypothesis, and a Pearson correlation would be conducted. Qualitatively, there are 6 open-ended questions included in the questionnaire. First, asking the volunteer to comment on questions relating to satisfaction. The second inquires which communication characteristic they feel is the most important, and if that's present. The third, asking them to comment on volunteer recognition. The fourth asks the volunteers if they are intending to leave and why. The fifth asks what we could do from a communication perspective to enhance their experience, and the sixth would be anything else they would like to discuss. A thematic analysis could then be conducted. In conclusion, poor volunteer management practices result in more lost volunteers than people losing interest because of changing personal or family needs. This was determined by a study from UPS in 1998. This particular pilot survey would be distributed to one of the nation's largest open admission animal shelters. It would target the 400 volunteers who work directly with the animal, and the purpose is to analyze data relating to staff to volunteer communication, specifically focusing on the quality over the quantity of this communication. Through these results, nonprofit organizations could gain a broader understanding of the importance of staff to volunteer communication and characteristics that need to be present to positively affect organizational commitment, volunteer satisfaction, and volunteer retention. If you have any questions or additional thoughts, please feel free to email me at this address. Thank you for your time. The remaining slides just go through the references. I appreciate it.